Welcome to the BiCurean podcast, where we explore and embrace the seeming contradictions of life. What actually is BiCurean, you ask?
While you may not necessarily have a mental concept of BiCurean, partially maybe because it's a made-up word, you embody it. What's happening right now in terms of the divisions between us is a focus on that which is different.
And lack of understanding and empathy for people's beliefs is no longer an excuse.
And it is in the differences we carry in ourselves that we find the BiCurean moment.
When you really dig into something, you're going to see some depth to it. It's not just a race thing. It's not just a conservation thing.
It's letting go of the or to make room for the and. We embrace all of you. Welcome to the BiCurean.
Hello, welcome to BiCurean. I am Aisala.
And I'm Eric.
And we are very excited to be here with our guest. I have to mix those things together.
Yes.
Chet Sisk.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be willing to tell us a little bit about yourself so our listeners know more about why we're excited?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a futurist. That is, my job is to find out what's going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years. Some futurists go way into the future, flying cars and all that kind of stuff. And, for 50 to 100 years, I concentrate on the next 3 to 5 because, quite frankly, we are living in probably the most dynamic time in the history of humanity.
Do you have a focus? When you say what's happening, is it general everything, or do you focus on specific topics?
It's a little bit of everything, but there are 3 areas that are really a focus for me. They include climate change, of course, automation, the automation revolution, really, or I should say the artificial intelligence revolution, which is changing the very foundation of how we live, and then income inequality. Because we're seeing it happen all over the world, and it is a factor that will affect quality of life in countries everywhere. So those three issues, or those trends, as it were, are my concentration. But I cover the waterfront.
Yeah, I've been following more futurists, and we were kind of talking right before we started recording, and it is fascinating. And I think, the realm of 100 years from now, we can leave that to Gene Roddenberry and other sci-fi writers. But I think you're right, like looking directly at what the next couple of years, it actually floored me the other day when I had the realization that the iPhone's really only been out for about 12 years.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're so ubiquitous now, like smartphones and things like that. I don't remember the time before that, except that I have those memories of landlines when I was growing up.
And dumb cell phones.
Right. You see a flip phone on a movie now, and it looks like it's a dated movie, right?
It does. It completely dates the movie, and it's so funny how that happens. I like the next 3 to 5 years simply because of the fact that you see a culmination of those 3 big trends that I talked about all coming together right now. And it's asking us to really kind of make some decisions we may not be ready for, but we got to step into it.
Yeah. And along those lines, like AI, for example, is something that people have just come to accept.
Yeah.
Like I recently wired my house with Amazon Alexas. We've got them in all of the rooms.
If you say the right thing, the lights behind us will go chartreuse.
Really?
And so we think about, this is kind of clever and cool. And if I'm actually being honest, I'm terrified.
I think about Skynet.
Yeah. Oh, well.
That's absolutely where I go.
I kid you not. I just read today that Amazon, of course, employs hundreds of people just to listen to your conversations.
I read that same article.
Yeah. So, therein lies the challenge of the new technology, right? It's a double-edged sword. It provides us with levels of convenience, but it really comes down to who's running that show. I always say the same thing. Technology is a toaster, right? You could either use it to make a wonderful breakfast in bed, toast and such for your sweetie, or you can toss it into their bathtub and electrocute them to death. But the toaster didn't make the decision. You did. Right. So it's really about who we are as humanity and our decisions about the technology.
So one point on that article that I think was what hit me in the ethics really hard. They brought up that some people had been listening to some of the things and were pretty sure they basically witnessed it recording a sexual assault.
Wow.
And Amazon, as a company, decided that they don't have enough personal information to get involved, nor do they want to. And so now we've got this massive ethics thing, right? So,
Yep.
so in addition to the fact that they overheard some woman singing in the shower, and that they've overheard, these private moments and stuff, but now they're hearing things that are criminal. And what's their level of responsibility? Like that's an ethics question that's so huge, and I didn't know how to react to it.
Yeah.
We had a guest on a month and a half ago or so who was a privacy attorney and was talking about the data ethics movement.
Yep.
And one of the things that I also feel comes in hand with that is establishing new social norms around technology and privacy, and like not just having it be laws or companies being accountable, which I do think is important.
Sure.
And culturally and socially, us really coming up with what are the new manners, honestly.
Yeah, see, I used to work for Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, and I remember the people say, "Oh my gosh, that's super secret technology source." And one of the things that I used to do voiceovers for a lot of the presentations that they present to the Pentagon in order to get funding. So one of the things that became real clear to me was that the first level of conversation was not about the moral ethics of whether or not we should do this.
It's can we?
Can we do it? And the question is always, there are certain things that we probably should not do, but those conversations are not front and center. But we're living in a time where now they have to be, because of the ubiquity of all of the technology. And as you mentioned, the whole aspect of being able to ask these kinds of ethical questions, we shouldn't be asking them in the moment. We should have a set of rules and a methodology, a belief system. Really, that's what it comes down to, is that we now have to talk about a different kind of belief system so that we are guided by that before the ethics question comes up, and so we know what to do. Right now, we're just flying by the seat of our pants.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I can't go a show without bringing it up. Facebook's a classic example. Like, they basically threw a whole bunch of stuff out there, and then now, 10 years later, really, since they really took off, we're kind of questioning how some of that looks and what was right or wrong. And, should Facebook be responsible for coups?
Yeah.
Should they be responsible for the persecution of entire, basically races in other countries? Suddenly there was a platform to persecute those people. I mean...
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, yeah, no, well, we're not. But we're hands off. And that's what caught me about the Amazon things. Like, well, we're hands off. We're not going to get involved in that. I'm like, do you ethically have responsibility to do that?
Yeah.
Or should we just not have you listening in on our conversations?
See, I don't want Facebook to make those decisions. I want us as a culture, as a society, to make those decisions, and then Facebook and everybody else responds to that fundamental premise set down by the society. And I think that we're at that place where we get a chance to actually really make those kinds of decisions about who do we want to be going forward? Who are we?
And based on the number of friends I have leaving Facebook right now, I think that indictment is coming.
Yeah, I'm hoping for it. I mean, honestly, that is my belief, and I'm holding out that hope that we are in a place where we're finally getting to the point of saying, this is messy. Let's reimagine who we are and then lay down the possibilities and how we should conduct ourselves, a code of conduct about who we are. We just haven't. I think, and this is just my personal opinion, that all of those things that are happening with Facebook and privacy and all those things are bringing us to the point of a question of questions that we should be asking and answers that we should be seeking.
Well, you're reminding me of there was a person that I was listening to on a podcast by The Economist, and I can't recall who it was. And one of the things that Eric and I have talked about is in a lot of ways, it feels like the American sort of left or progressive community has in some ways contributed to the situation that we're in by putting out there this idea that the American ideals of, freedom and liberty and truth, whatever that is, these ideals that we had that bonded us as a society, we all sort of had that this is what we should be doing. And then there was an awareness that, oh, wait a minute, we're not including women, or we're not including Black people, or we're not including people of disabilities. And we went from these are our ideals that we share, and this is who we are, to we aren't doing it, so therefore our ideals are a lie. And the reality is that we as a country have probably never lived up to those ideals. Like when we were founded, even the basic racism that was part of how we were founded, the basic sexism that was baked in. Okay, we said this is what we were doing, and actually it's not what we did. However, I feel like this woman was saying this, and I was like, I think I really agree with her that we really went in the wrong direction as a left leaning philosophy by saying, oh, these ideals are fake, instead of saying these ideals are powerful, they're bonding, and we are not applying them. We are not living up to them. Even if we never have, that doesn't mean they're not worth seeking to live up to or into. And so we don't have anything to even speak to the conservative community around a shared ideal because we crafted our own set. And now we bash each other over the heads. You're racist and you're not patriotic, and we aren't able to come together because we don't have that foundation of who we are as something we can actually agree on. We've turned it into someone has to win and someone has to be defeated.
So you're saying something that I think about all the time when people say, make America great again. And I say, America's never really been great yet.
Right.
So the potential for America is huge. It's dramatic. There was a book written by a conservative fellow years ago. His name was Ben Wattenberg, and he wrote this book called The First Universal Nation. And basically, it was the idea that we could leverage all the dynamism of all of the people of this country, women, people of color, just everybody, just cover the waterfront and leverage that into a dynamic force for good and set the model for the rest of the world, right? The challenge that we've faced, and I think where you get that left pushback, is that potential has always been there, but there's always been this gigantic pushback like, we don't want that. So because we don't want that, yes, you may visualize us as this first universal nation, as Wattenberg prophesized, really, but that's not where we want to go. So the entrenchment of those ideas that have been baked in, racism, sexism, they're just coming to the fore. We kind of think, oh, there are more racists and sexists now. No, America has always been in that place, and so they pushed back really against the general ideas that could lead to this greatness. Now, the challenge for the progressives is that exactly what you said, that there's an opportunity for us to reimagine the possibilities. And I think that's where we're stuck, is that we're so busy talking about these guys are bad people and the bad guys saying, you'll never get in here, that there's no place for somebody to say, what if we reimagined all of these possibilities and did create the first universal nation? What would that look like economically, morally, a vision for the future, all of those things?
I'm not sure people can even agree on that. And, and I think that's been a part of the problem as well. Because even when the nation was founded, one of my favorite points to bring up is the man who said all men are created equal owned slaves.
Sure.
And it took 100 years to turn that ship.
Yeah. So that's why we've never really truly been great. And I know I'm going to get some pushback on that, but I'm just saying the greatness, it's like us being in our 20s and, we've tried all the different jobs and dated different people, maybe a few marriages here and there and divorces and blah, blah, blah. But there's an idea of us of where we want to be. And then at some point in time, hopefully, if we learned our lessons and we figured a few things out, we arrive at that place and we arrive at our greatness and we stop and say, I finally become the man that I always wanted to be. I finally become the woman that I used to dream about back in my 20s. With a lot of trial and error in my 20s and 30s. But now in my 40s, I think I've finally got the grounding. And I think that it's messy, but I think that we have the potential for that. And I think crises bring about potential. That's why I'm a hopeful futurist in the sense that I think it's gonna get messy, and it is messy. It's been messy for a long time, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But the potential for us for greatness is greater now than any other time, I believe, in the history of this country.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It sounds odd, but what I actually kind of feel like where we're at right now is people have been closeted racists or bigots or misogynists, and we'll thank Trump for one thing. He let everybody air out their dirty laundry. In a lot of ways, it does look a lot worse.
Yeah.
And this is a point that's been made to me, and to the point where I'm now making it to others. It's like, it was always there.
Sure. Right.
Right. Like, so
Yeah.
your head in the sand thinking the 90s, the 80s, whatever, was good because you just didn't hear about this. Or even into the 2000s where you get this impression like, man, I thought we had beaten back racism.
Yeah.
You just didn't hear about it. But was literally the answer.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
We weren't hearing about it.
Sure.
And so in some ways now it's gut check.
Yeah.
We're being asked to actually look at it, talk to our neighbors, actually do things that involve engagement around those subjects rather than just, maybe ignoring your racist uncle at Thanksgiving and then pretending like it just wasn't around.
Yeah. The thing that I'm concerned about more than, like I said, we're at the precipice, quite frankly, but I'm concerned that the extension of life expectancy in this country has gone down for the 3 years in a row. That's amazing for a major industrialized country. And the number one causes are the tools of despair, suicide, and drug overdose. So I'm concerned that we must bring a greater vision than we've ever had. Otherwise, we might not make it. I mean, there's always that potential. But at the same time, I always say that, crises bring about, can bring about great possibilities. So the most important thing that we need to pay attention to are the tools of despair. Because when people get to the place where they say, you know what, there's no hope, then the possibilities that we all imagine and dream of also slip away.
Well, and interesting, I was listening to The Hidden Brain, the Lonely American Male today. It's a really, really great episode. And one of the things that they talked about in that is that your social engagement is a higher predictor of longevity than even physical activity.
Truth.
And so when I think about the cultural situation where people are in a lot of ways scared to talk to other people, and they do get stuck in their phone. I mean, get stuck in my phones. We don't have to go out because we can stay at home and have movies and food delivered.
Sure.
There's just a lot fewer reasons for people to be nudged into interaction or engagement. And it is that, having friends and that social engagement that is actually a suicide preventer.
It is. I mean, let me throw something else out too, because I think a lot of our belief is that if we're just nicer to other people and spend more time
friends.
social. Yeah. No. I this is something that I heard not too long ago, and people were in a conversation. I run into these all the time, and they say, we need these social interactions, and I said, you're exactly right. But here's the thing that I'm concerned about. It's the same thing with racism and sexism and all of the other things. A lot of those things are baked into the system. So let's just say you and I and we all get together and we say, let's go out and just invite people over our homes for dinner. And all of a sudden we're doing this great work that really makes the difference. Like you said, the social interaction, we get a chance to discover more about us. The problem is that a lot of people will leave that dinner and go back into a system that reinforces the kinds of things that we don't want. stratification, classism, racism, misogyny. That's really the great challenge that we face. Is not that I don't think that people are more willing to be more social and connect with each other. I think that the system or systems, as it were, that work together to I call it a caste system, to maintain that structure, because that's how the society has been constructed from the beginning, and a lot of people are making a lot of money on that stratification. That's where the real challenge is.
Well, yeah, and speaking, I'm in the tech industry now, for example, and that's where you can really see it, because ageism is a big thing.
Ageism, yeah.
And racism, but not because a company may not want to hire somebody who's black, right?
Yeah.
They certainly hire Asians,
Sure.
right? And that's not never considered. But but really digging into it, that like the courses of people's lives that can allow them to get into tech is not friendly to black culture and black communities right now.
Yeah.
So the companies aren't even, like you said, it's systemic.
Yeah.
And you can backtrace it so far back.
Yeah.
That it's not that the company I work for is owned by Israelis.
Yeah, sure.
It's not that they would ever, and when we have a few black people that work for the company,
Sure.
it's not that they're not hiring that.
Right.
It's not that they're not hiring women. We have plenty of those. It's systemic in that in order to break into that, you need to have certain opportunities.
Yeah.
And this is something that came up for me a lot, just in understanding what white privilege really meant.
Sure.
We went to a white privilege symposium several months ago, and I got it, but it was presented in a lot different way, because it wasn't this, you need to feel guilty for being white.
No. And that's the thing, I think, is another aspect that's slowing this process down, is that as long as it's based around guilt and shame and those kinds of things, I can't see something changing. But I do love the fact that we've gotten to the place of starting to realize, it's the system.
Right.
As opposed to, they're just like Bull Connor out of the South and with a bull rod saying, segregation forever. It's not that conversation. That's a 1960s conversation. Even back then, it was not, it did not reflect what was really happening. And that is a caste system that was created to maintain this kind of structure. But now what we're seeing is that we're seeing the futility of that system, that the technologies, I would argue, are challenging those systems to say, the system that you needed, that caste system that you created in order to leverage humanity or the other people, slavery, discrimination, whatever, you don't need that system anymore because the efficiencies of the technology say, you don't need to do that. So now we're trying to figure out, oh my gosh, well, it's baked into the system. So what do we do now? Well, this is the opportunity for us to become great and to be able to leverage all of the potential that we never saw before because we were comfortable in caste. So this is the first time, I think, in millennia, hundreds of years, where people are starting to say, let's re-examine the human experience in this country. Because if we re-examine it right and look at all of the potential that it creates, the possibilities are endless. And then we become the Star Trek culture that Roddenberry was hoping for and Picard talks about all the time. But until we get past this great, and it's not just about the stuff, the real crazy stuff that's baked in. It's also about our response to climate change. So if we use the old system, and I keep saying this all the time, that the command and control model that basically kind of ruled the day for the past few hundred years, it is not agile or has the capacity to be able to take a society through the kinds of changes we're about to go through. It just does. It won't. It can't. It tends to use a big stick, and then all hell breaks loose. Feminine principle leadership, which says everybody matters, and how do we leverage everybody, and how do we get everybody in, that is a much more flexible and agile system and leadership model that could actually lead to us leveraging the best of all of us. But we're and it's going to take a minute, but that is as far as I'm concerned, that's the only way forward.
Yeah. Well, and you're talking about sea change. Everything we've talked about here comes down to a pretty massive shift.
Yeah.
in thinking, and it's happening.
Yep.
And one of the things that we talk about all the time, we do live in our bubbles.
Yeah.
We don't have a whole lot of friends. She has more based on her background and staying in touch with people from when she was a Mormon.
Oh, wow.
To actually talk to that, right? But I mean, I don't remember the last time I was talking to somebody at work and they're like, who would vote for Trump? 125 million people did. They just don't cross our paths.
Yeah.
And that's where, outreach and different kinds of things could work. But even then, the other side's not always any more interested in that conversation than we have success in bringing it to them.
Well,
Sure.
And that was Vanessa Otero, who made one of the first media bias charts, was on the show in November, and she has a blog on junk news. She says, and her view is we need nutritious news, and we need to do civic exercise. Is that what she called it?
Right.
And so in terms of if you've been eating a lot of junk news and you're noticing that you're feeling polarized and short tempered, you need to go do some civic exercise. You need to volunteer in your community or go to a presentation by someone who has a different political view or talk to someone you don't agree with.
Go sit in on a local city council
and
meeting.
listen to them.
Yeah, see what's really happening in your community, not just this high level U.S. versus Korea or whatever.
See, the great challenge that we face is, again, I think we have developed low information populace.
Yes,
That's
we
the
have.
challenge, because so they're looking at all that and they're like, I don't need that. I only need one guy to tell me exactly what to do, and there's no push to seek a greater amount of information. That's a challenge I think will always be there.
Well, and a question I want to ask you, because I know you have a journalism background.
Yep.
A friend of mine was talking about that exact experience, that, her parents are big Fox News watchers, and they take, and she's like, they're actually pretty critical thinkers, but they just watch the news and they don't really question it. And she said, and I think it's because growing up, the anchors were actually journalists, and their job was to represent a lower bias. Their job was actually to do kind of what we're talking about doing on the show, to dig into something and to try to present people with as balanced a view as we can with our own biases, to acknowledge our biases so that people who don't have time to go dig in can benefit from that.
Walter Cronkite.
Well, they didn't editorialize back in the day.
Well, I'll tell you this. I started my career life out as a reporter for WREG TV in Memphis, Tennessee. I got in, you go in with the whole aspect of journalist, and, you have Walter Cronkite in your mind, and you're thinking, we're going to bring the information and speak truth to power and, just lay it out for the people to be able to make good decisions. And I was so disappointed. I always remember those famous words of my assignment editor. He said, and I would say, hey, there's multiple sides to the story. And he'd say, not anymore, kid. This is show business. Something happened to the industry I'm dating myself, but this is back in the 80s. And I sat back and I said, that's not why I got into this business.
Wasn't it that cable?
I was going to say, I blame cable. I think
Cable.
there was too much opportunity for information. CNN came along, and they were a 24-hour news source.
Yep.
And what actually ended up happening, and you can hear this from interviews just over the years with the different anchors, they realized they needed to fill 24 hours.
Yeah, exactly. That, you know what? So I went to work for cable after I left television news. There was a company here by the name of American Television and Communications. It was Time Inc.'s leg of cable. And they hired me in their research and development department. And then I was like, why are you hiring me? I mean, I came from a creative background, yes, and a news background. They said, here's the deal. We need content. And we need content like crazy. We're building out. We know we have a bunch of subscribers, but our retention rate is just it's terrible. We have to do something else. So we need good content. And you're right that the big push became content, whatever it is, in order to make sure, and especially it started leaning toward, people's biases and concepts and stuff that had nothing to do necessarily with news or information, but with just plain entertainment.
It was, and it's almost it created the sensationalization culture, right? Because we just went through the 20th anniversary, of Columbine recently.
Right.
And I remember when that happened, it was very clear in my mind. It was a wall-to-wall 2 days of coverage
Yep.
on CNN.
Yep.
Now a school shooting gets an hour or two.
Yeah.
Right? And because they've realized, and you look at what
Stunning.
CNN does now, since about 2015, 2014 even, when the presidential campaign started ramping up, they were covering Trump, and then he got elected, and it's like the Trump channel.
Yep.
It's what did Trump do today?
It gets the ratings,
But it's getting them the
advertising
ratings.
dollars. I mean, I guess that's what I mean by now we're at a place where we have to ask about the morality of some certain things, and that's hard in an environment where it's all about the dollar. So,
Yeah.
but now we're facing levels of challenge to the quality of life and the core of our existence that we've never faced before.
Yeah.
So to me, that has at least brought us to the point where we have to ask some really pressing questions that we've never asked before. And may I say that I think the only way forward as far as leadership is concerned, it's going to take a level of visionary leadership we've never seen before too.
Yeah.
And not just the person that says this is wrong and this is right, but someone who's able to reimagine what it means to be human in the United States and around the world, and say, how do we set that tone? And then have a number of people who will say, I will support that because the alternative is not tenable. And that's a different kind of leadership. I tend to think that it will be a female that will do it, simply because of feminine principle leadership. Women tend to lean toward bringing everybody in, empathy, checking in on everybody. There's enough for everyone, sharing.
I nominate Nita.
Nita.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Do we get to pick? Or?
I think that I truly do believe and it could be. I mean, Nita, all of a sudden, you just never know how these things work.
Yeah.
But I think that there has to be a different kind of sea change in the tone and the kinds of things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a woman, but at least a man that sees it from the perspective of what's the power of feminine principle leadership, and how can it help us, as I mentioned earlier, be agile enough in order to help us to transfer through this particular phase. I'm telling you, and I'm repeating this, but the command and control model is destruction.
It's destruction.
I mean, in the end, and in this particular time, maybe in some other time, in maintaining caste, it might have been, but the world is a different place, primarily because of the technology and our thinking of it differently. So it needs a different kind of complex, nuanced vision.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about universal basic resources and that project that you're doing. It seems really intriguing.
Yes. Well, Universal Basic Resources is designed to do this. What I started discovering once I started going around and telling people, we're running into climate change challenges, and the society needs support and help. A number of people out there doing great work in the privacy of their basements and all of these, farming, technology, and they are looking. There are some just people who are bringing great solutions to the great challenges that we face, and Universal Basic Resources is designed to bring all of those people, their platforms, their tools, their ideas to a platform that allows us to take it. So wherever I go in the presentations I do around the world, I can say, get on our platform, and there are people there that are now bringing all of these tools that your community may be able to access, you may be able to access, personally, so that we can do better in being able to transfer through the next 3 to 5 years. It is focused around not just people saying, hey, I sell new cars, but more like people who are saying, I have a way to be able to increase the efficiency of hydroponics. Or here's another way of us being able to distribute food. And these are people that I just kind of discovered along the way who've been toiling in their basements and such. And I said, we want to bring you to the fore. And we're going to use our platform in order to make that happen. So we're just now going through this giant shift, primarily because of a revised website to focus on them. And it's primarily because we're about to launch, as I mentioned earlier, we have a television feature being produced with the help of CBS that we're going to send all around the country to talk about, again, universal basic resources and real basic stuff that people can do in order to help do climate change adaptation, to do their part about climate change. So what we want to do is empower people. We want to empower communities as opposed to leaving it to just waiting for if there's going to be a Green New Deal or if their local government will do something. We think that people in the privacy of their own homes should have the tools, the support, and the encouragement to take action themselves. So we're really excited about the universal basic resources.
That sounds fabulous. I look forward to, I hope you will send us information on how to access the show. We'll definitely get that out there.
We'll link it up. And I admit we had some conversation before we started recording around climate change, and I intentionally didn't bring it up because I'd actually like to do a show in the near future and go over it in more detail and not just have it part of this general discussion, because I think you have some fascinating thoughts on that, and it is kind of in your wheelhouse even more so. And like you mentioned, climate change adaptation.
Yes.
So I would definitely like to schedule a time and have you back on and just dedicate some time to that specifically. But
just to speak to that real briefly, that is the most important conversation we must have. I as we talked about earlier, I think that we're getting sidetracked by these constant doom or gloom conversations, because that's all mass media really has been producing of late. And so we want to focus on the whole aspect of what are the things now we can do, morally, spiritually, technically, in the privacy of our own homes. And people need those kinds of solutions going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And I think, honestly, we could probably spend a lot of time here. And I really appreciate knowing that there are so many people out there. As you said, there's this doom and gloom attitude. And I admit I teeter. There are some days I wake up and I think,
we all do,
right?
believe me.
And so for me, knowing there are people like you out there also really saying, I believe in our future.
Yep.
I believe in better for our children.
Yes.
I believe that we are capable of having thriving communities that are genuinely inclusive and that we can actually express the real values of our country.
Yes.
That are about a truly a universal dynamism, a way to be that salad bowl together, and the innovation that can occur when you would genuinely meet somebody who's different and you discover how to communicate and connect. You have to innovate. You can't live in your homogenous reflexes, and that is such an inspiring thing. And to know that there's so many people who are doing that in these different ways and providing resources for communities is really exciting.
I believe that is the next evolution of humanity. And so it's messy right now, and it feels messy because of the fact that we haven't seen anything like it before. But if there is a country, a society that can lead that step, it is this one. And I truly do believe in the first universal nation. And I think that, like I said, it's going to be a messy affair, but the other side of it, our children will thank us for it forever.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Welcome to this week's BiCurean moment.
Am I going first?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. So recently-ish, Joe Biden has been called out for some of his public behaviors. And while there's a whole Me Too kind of view of that, one of the things that I found really interesting was an article in The Atlantic that was talking about touch and physical contact. And they referenced Biden. That's how I ended up reading it,
Right.
is that larger context. And for instance, one of the things they had in here that I thought was really interesting, over and over again, they've shown that humans require touch for development. It's not a optional experience. We really need it.
Yeah.
And people who have more touch in their life tend to be healthier. They did a study on people who were exposed to the flu virus, and the ones who had more hugs were more likely not to have succumbed to it.
Got it.
And they did this other study in 1986 that has been replicated many times in the pediatric journal that showed that 10 days of body stroking and passive movements of premature babies for less than an hour led those babies to grow 47% faster than the babies who were not. And they've done several things with babies to show that, like, the babies that are exposed to daily touch, and then they have some other studies they've referenced around people with cancer and other types of heart, like larger illnesses, MS, 15 minutes a day of touch. And it doesn't have to be therapeutic touch like a massage, or it doesn't have to be something that is an educated or trained touch. Just simply the act of being touched about 15 minutes a day will relieve pain symptoms and increase their resiliency and those kinds of things. And so this article was kind of talking about the conundrum of touch, which is that on the one hand, there's a massive body of scientific data that indicates that it is not just helpful, but extremely helpful for our physical and mental and emotional health to have regular touch. And we are, as a society, moving farther and farther away from touch being something that is comfortable or helpful or comfortable for people to engage in even like kind of casual ways, that even handshakes can be rejected. We know someone for whom a handshake is considered to be too intimate. They won't do that.
Yeah.
And not surprisingly, they have extreme anxiety. So there's some it's just, to me, it's a very interesting situation that we are so terrified of connection, and yet it is shown to be consistently beneficial. In addition to this article, I was listening to an NPR, The Hidden Brain podcast on the Lonely American Male, which I referenced in the other show, and they were talking about, they did a study with people who were riding the subway, and they said, to a portion of them, probably a third, because they divided it up into 3 actions, that their job was to engage with people while they were riding. And then they had a third of them, and their job was to actively stay isolated. And then the others were just to do what they normally did. And what they found is that the people who engaged were pretty much all of them, everyone was pretty reluctant to engage. They expected that it would go poorly, that people would want to talk to them. And every single one of them had overall sense of higher levels of happiness in their life from making that one change.
Yeah.
Even though they didn't want to do it, right? They were resistant, and yet by doing it, something shifted for them, not just in terms of their commute, but in terms of their overall life, that the more social interaction, the more social engagement, the happier they were. And they said it was interesting because a lot of people, the reluctance was a variety of things. A primary reluctance was this concern that people wouldn't want to engage. And about 100% of the time, people actually responded and engaged.
Yeah. We just live in a physically isolated society, I think. And for a lot of people, the idea of that just seems a little odd. There's social stigmas about, guys touching other guys and things like that. It makes total sense that it's a positive thing. Just as per usual, we've entered into, it feels like, another realm of making our isolationism about ourselves and our bodies more prevalent and known. and so it shuts those doors down regardless. Because I'm betting that anybody listening to this, there's probably people sitting there saying, "Oh, yeah, no, touch is good. I like it. I don't do it. Maybe I should," right? And so it becomes one of those common sense things for some people, like, to have those interactions. But then you have things like the Joe Biden thing, and it wasn't specifically. It's gotten attention in a Me Too sort of way, but what he did wasn't specifically anything more than just a little creepy. Like, now you get into pushing the boundaries of intimacy, and that's another area where I think you have to be careful. But in general, yeah, I think it's a positive thing.
Well, and one of the quotes that they had in the article from him was that while he didn't mean anything negative, right? He said, "I guess I need to acknowledge that times have changed." That and that's part of the point they were making, is that we did live in a world where casual touch was not considered to be quite as distasteful as it is in modern America.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to weigh in on that as a positive or a negative. However, I'm going to observe that in this attempt to react to what have been violations,
Yeah.
I think a byproduct of that has been a fear of touch.
Yeah.
And a fear of initiating touch in ways that used to be considered more normalized.
Yeah.
And really reflecting on, is that byproduct something we really want to be happening? There's, for instance, teachers used to be able to hug kids. And now most schools have a rule that teachers cannot physically connect with children.
Yeah.
On the one hand, the motivation for that is from severe violations that people
Absolutely.
don't want to see perpetuated.
Yeah.
Got it, right? And on the other hand, kids are very physically connected and affectionate. And for a kid to be rejected physically because they spend 6 to 8 hours a day with their teachers, and to have that modeled, what's the impact on them? Do they then, I don't really know what the rules are. Kids not allowed to touch each other. I could see that also being a thing, especially younger kids.
I feel like that's actually been kind of enacted in schools. There's kind of jokes about it on TV and stuff about, even the school dance and don't dance too close and stuff like that. And it comes from that fear of touch and interaction being of a sexual nature, whether it's violating in some way or some other sort of negative thing. So, yeah, I mean, I do feel like societally, maybe not for no reason,
Yeah,
there's been reactions around it.
We have the motivation for these assertions of boundaries and policies are they're horrifying experiences, and people want to prevent those horrifying experiences from occurring, and I'm 100% on board with that.
Yeah.
And yet there's also this byproduct of creating even a more concern, physical isolation. And we have a lot of information from people studying this and studying us as we are social creatures that tells us that lack has a definite impact on people, and the introduction of touch has a definite positive impact. And so for me, reading that article and was really thinking about what's happening around that, in my own life, I tend to be affectionate with folks. I was very affectionate with my children, and I couldn't imagine living in a physically isolated world.
Yeah.
I would definitely feel a certain kind of like damaged by that.
Yeah.
So it's just something I wanted to bring up as a way to consider some of the context of what's happening, and recognizing that this byproduct that we're creating is going to have its own pretty negative impact on our culture. And are there things that we can do to counter that?
There are. I think the one thing that I would say about it, just in general, that's probably a wise way to approach things, is to embrace consent culture and, ask, be prepared for no's, but, maybe, in your daily life, people can think of different ways, like, oh, I've been friends with this person kind of as an acquaintance. Maybe I can hug them goodbye. So I'm going to ask, hey, is it okay if I hug you goodbye? And, we can start building a culture and our own internal cultural, with our tribe, the people we see, the people we end up hanging out with or whatever, of it's okay to be a little more casual with that. And it doesn't have to mean something sexual or, along those lines. But yeah, I mean, it's also good practice for consent culture in general. So,
No, that sounds like and is that something that they could implement with children? I mean, it's one of the things that I have seen over the years. When my kids were in elementary school, they had 20 minutes a day to go outside. When I was a kid, I had 2 full-hour recesses.
yeah.
Like as a community, I don't feel like we take very good care of the physical needs of our citizens. So we don't encourage our children to exercise and be outside. We're now saying that like they should be in environments that are pretty sterile when it comes to physical connection and touch. And to me, that's really concerning because we are whole creatures. We require mental, emotional, and physical, and some form of, in my opinion, metaphysical or spiritual stimulation. And really and truly, like we're getting weird about it.
Yeah, but
So
again, nothing happens in a vacuum. There's always a story that led to the cultural shifts in that, teachers hugging kids is just not acceptable anymore because of a couple of bad people.
yeah,
They're not reflective of everyone, but
Right.
they were a thing.
yeah, right. It happened. It was
Yeah.
horrifying. We don't want to see it again. Totally on board with that. And like you were saying, maybe it's a consent culture thing. Maybe it's a movement that puts some aspect of like comprehending the importance of it in schools. I don't know. I do think it's something that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So that's all. Think about it. Give someone you know and love a hug as long as they consent to it.
Yeah. So mine actually stemmed from the conversations we were having with Chet, both during the recording of the show and then kind of before and after, and along the lines of the media, which we've done shows on, we've talked about and all of that. And one thing that really resonated that we were talking about off air was the sensationalization that the media does. It's big stories, it's entertainment. One of the things that I was actually surprised that I had brought up in the offline conversation with Chet, and he seemed to have an aha moment about it. Like when CNN started with cable news, they were 24 hours, they needed content, and it became about entertainment and ratings. And so the big bombastic story is what grabbed your attention and pulled it in. And now it's 30 years later, and we're just used to that. And so the news doesn't serve as much of a purpose of informing us anymore. It serves a purpose of drawing our attention. And I think in some ways that actually, goes hand in hand with what we've said about the kind of news that you're ingesting. Is it objective? Is it true? Is it editorialized? Is it an opinion piece? I mean, there's all of those different things to take into account. But, one of the things that we want to do on this show and kind of driving my passion, after that conversation is have discussions, deep dives, formulate our own opinions on it, get out of the 24-hour news cycle. I had brought up that when Columbine happened, I remember in 1999, it was wall-to-wall coverage for 2 full days, and now a school shooting gets a couple of hours. And that's a decision they've made based on the entertainment value that they see in that story. It doesn't mean, and in some ways people are less drawn to watching that because it's more commonplace. So we have to be really objective, and I want to on this show, really focus on the objective nature of things. We are actually editorializing. We are giving our opinions, and that is the structure of our show. But part of why it's fun for us to do, and hopefully fun for people to listen to, is because we do deeper dives into, past the headlines.
Well, and something we talked about is, and talked about with Chet, is that one of the motivations that we had for the format was to give folks who don't have the time to go out and look at several resources or have a chat with one of the guests we have that knows a little bit about the situation.
Like, right. How many people find an expert on something they're interested in to talk to?
And to give people an encapsulated piece to look at or listen to in this case, in terms of a topic that is below the headlines, so that in a lot of ways that's what the news was meant to be, right? To give people information, and then that's what ultimately we want to do, is give people some exposure to some information that isn't necessarily easily accessible because people are busy.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'm thinking about is the adaptation. I mean, he was talking about adaptation in terms of climate change, right? Like you have to accept that this is what's happening and adapt to what exists and prepare for how it's going to affect things. And I just had this flash of, in terms of the news, there's an adaptation as well. Like if it has to be entertaining in order to get people's attention, I like the John Oliver approach, right? It's very entertaining.
Yeah.
And yet it is also generally a pretty deep dive into a topic.
And things that, I mean, I like his show, and he covers things that I just would never thought of. And I feel like I have an informed opinion around those things. I don't think all of them require a drive to activism, but
Yeah.
it is good to know. And in a lot of ways, I wish he could cover more subjects than his once a week with a couple of months off for vacation time in between. So,
And I wonder if, like, I absolutely lament for sure the unbiased, information-based, dry news of the past. Like that it speaks to my academic heart.
Yeah.
And if we have to be honest about it, like those days are over.
Yeah.
That's not, for the most part, people aren't going to show up for that.
It looks boring by comparison, right?
And so if we need to make it entertaining, right, to adapt to what's actually happening and how people are going to pay attention, I feel like there are some models like John Oliver.
Well, in The Daily Show, I think
The
they really
Daily
set the
Show.
standard for that.
We're also, right, like very entertaining, and yet does give really interesting deep dive information in that, as opposed to the sensationalized form of entertainment, which is blowing things up, editorializing or commenting or propaganda in order to like motivate a crisis reaction so that you're excited enough to keep watching past the commercial.
Yeah.
And so if we just accept entertainment is part of the process, what is ethical and moral forms of entertainment around this particular situation?
Yeah.
And then also I liked what Vanessa Otero with the media bias chart was talking about. I think it'd be also really great to get to a point where we label news.
Yeah.
So that it's a little bit more clear what we're watching.
Right.
And not everybody's going to listen to the labels, but I think that would also help in terms of, once again, people don't have a lot of time. So they go to what they know or to what's convenient. I certainly have done that. And if it were labeled and I see like, oh, I'm going to something that's like super biased and not much news.
Yeah.
I better look for something that has a different label.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's definitely something to that. And I think, we just need to be responsible. And, our commitment here on this show is to do what we do. And hopefully it is both entertaining and informative. But check your facts, check your knowledge.
Check your assumptions.
Yep. So, and on that note, thanks for listening. Please join our mailing list at bit.ly/BiCure, BICUR, and get episodes and blogs conveniently emailed directly to you. Learn more about us at BiCurean.com/podcast.
If you like what we're doing, please rate us on your listening platform of choice.
Thank you.